this is Miriam Brussel, and I'm on the shores this morning of Lake George at Weowaka Center for Women. And I'm speaking with the sculptor of this marvelous piece of Birch Woman, Pam Golden. Tell us about your work here.
Hi, Miriam. This sculpture has been installed. It's a site-specific sculpture that I created for a tree that has changed its shape. It was installed in 2010, so it was standing for 10 years, and then there was a big storm this past November, and the birch fell. So this is the sculpture is rising again. Originally created from a way of me dealing with the death of my friend Jonna Albee from breast cancer. I had created other sculptures along the way, one of which was in a book, this book, Outrageous, The Art and Writing of Women with Breast Cancer. Jonna, my friend Jonna, our kids were around the same age. Her daughter Ariana was 11, my kids are on either side of her. She was a natural foods cook writing a cookbook called Greens, Glorious Greens, and was pretty much the healthiest person I ever knew when she was diagnosed with breast cancer. So, you know, sometimes if you're an artist, art is a way to express feelings. So I cast her, when she lost all her hair, I cast her face with plaster gauze and made a mold and then pressed clay into the mold. And she decorated one of the masks and hung it over her stove. And I also decorated one of the masks, but I put a horseshoe crab on like a helmet and called it Chemo Warrior. So the two pieces hung there over her stove. And unfortunately, she did not survive. She passed away at 49. And I just kept working with her mask because I was just so incredibly sad and I couldn't really believe this was happening. So this was Jonna, very vibrant, alive, wonderful person. And I created another sculpture besides the Chemo Warrior called Facing Breast Cancer. Jonna becomes a birch tree. And birch trees are very spiritual. There's alphabets that have trees as things, and so I made this sculpture, and it was the base of it. I work with clay. I hand build with clay, and it was sort of a clay base, similar to this, but it had birch bark on it, and then there was a what's it called? Dress form that she's shrugging off. So I created this sculpture, and then there was a clay torso and where her breast that was cancer. I had broken glass, and
It's in that book there, which is
so
a
I made
compilation.
the sculpture, and I took pictures of it and I sent it to a breast cancer slide registry, and I get a phone call from them. This is the sculpture here. It is it's included. It became chosen to be part of this book called Outrageous, Art and Writings of Women with Breast Cancer. And it was through a big grant through the Susan G. Komen Foundation. And I get a phone call from them saying, "We like the sculpture, it's going to be in a show and it's going to travel." And I go, "Do you know how big this piece is?" So you create it.
How big is it?
It's life size. So luckily my husband Craig is a carpenter, and he built 2 big containers, and this is clay with bark over it. It's an assemblage sculpture. There's just this figure, the clay, and this was her face. So the idea is that one side is sort of in prayer, and the other side that's reflected in the mirror is sort of her pain of what's going on. So
that's another sculpture with 2 sides of the
well, this
head.
was the first sculpture.
That's the first one.
So I created this sculpture in 1995. And at the time, I talked about that the broken shards of the mirror was sort of a metaphor for how your lives are changed suddenly by this horrible disease and what it meant. So I did this sculpture in 1995. She must have died a few years before. I don't know, can't remember exactly. But so the piece traveled for 5 years. Then it came back to me. It's back in my studio now in Massachusetts. But a few years later, I came to Weowaka, and this tree that had originally had two more big, huge trunks, there was one that was missing. And I said to Christine Dixon, who was a wonderful director at Weowaka for many, many years, I said, I'd like to create the Birch Woman. I'd like to make the Birch Woman sculpture. It would be site-specific and built for this tree. And she agreed. So this is a picture of what it used to look like. And it was a challenge because the tree is very big, so it had to be a big enough sculpture that it would work. I build in sections. My kiln is 29 inches tall, so in a way they're hand-built pieces, and they were stacked together. There's a rod going up through it, and it used to be right there in the middle here, and this was another whole big tree trunk. So it was a very cool thing once it got installed.
Walking by,
you wouldn't even see it. So it was right in the middle. It was flanked by the birch tree
I'm going to go over and show the back.
Okay. So in my mind, I was inspired by this story about John, but also about the idea that she was coming back to life in a different way.
Tell us about the green hair.
Well, Jonna was working on a cookbook called Greens, Glorious Greens, which was published with her friend Kathy Walters, St. Martin's Press, and it was because she was working. So I did another sculpture too called Jonna with a Head of Greens, and so the idea that her hair is green because she was the metaphor of everlasting life, and also the greens that you cook. So this piece, when I did this sculpture, I felt like it was more sort of a resolve of acceptance of her death, and it was a memory of her amazing vitality and amazing smile and energy and love of life. So this side really kind of is Jonna's smile. It's her face.
This side.
This side here.
The other side is lovely too.
One of the people who, Gail Oakes, who does all the gardening here, has named it Serenity and Joy, and I think that's a nice way of putting it. So originally it was right in the center so that you could sit here and then look up at her face, basically, sort of contemplate your life or remember people who weren't here, things like that.
Yes, you have a little cairn here.
Yes.
Along the lines of memory.
Well, I think that that's very powerful. I think my own experience with doing community sculptures, I did several pieces that were interactive wish sculptures that were on the Boston Common for first night, and also at Art Splosion down in Raleigh, is that people, if people are invited to participate, they like to, and I think it adds to the art, the interactive art. Yeah. So I felt like this is everyone I know has lost somebody to some horrible disease. As you get older, that's what life's about, and so this was an opportunity for people to write and add to the energy of the sculpture.
Wonderful.
And I think Weowaka has history of having retreats here for breast cancer survivors, and also other kinds of groups come here.
Yes.
So
now there are other sculptures sculptures over here.
So my first vision was to have there's these 3 stands of birches. So this was installed in 2010, and then I did the birch elder, which is over here.
This is amazing too.
This piece, unlike that one, which is wrapped up and stays there all the time, this piece, Joe Wiley, who's the caretaker, brings the sculpture in and out each year. So this is the birch elder. And then that was installed in 2011. And then in 2013, I created the Birch Girl.
There she is. Let's see if I can get, yeah, there it is, the sign, Birch Girl. And a little butterfly. And does she stay or go?
No, she also goes in. And that's actually kind of funny thing because Joe puts her in the window of Lake House.
Oh!
And, he posts pictures of her looking out the window in the winter time. So it's very sweet.
And this, look, is this a bird bath?
So this was when I had this, it's really interesting what happened. So Joe calls me in November, FaceTimed, and shows me the sculpture on the ground, the Birch Woman.
Oh no!
And it's like, oh no. And amazingly, luckily, the arms of the Birch Woman had broken, but not the face or the torso. So I was able to bring it to my studio with the help of my sister Catherine and her husband Michael. Came and picked it up and transferred it to the car of their son Emmett, who lives in the Boston area. He drove it to Boston and gave it to my son Alex, who drove it to me in Marshfield, and I bring it to my studio.
Oh, there was a
So
whole
it's been a real help.
community
Yes.
of effort.
And so for me to create the trunk of the tree is sort of working in a different direction. But this piece right here was part of the original tree trunk. It was, and I decided I could make something out of it. So I added a bird bath. So now there's a little bird bath here.
But it the whole thing is sculpture and clay, but part of the tree trunk as well.
Well, no. My work is always made out of. I hand build out of use of white raccoon clay, and I hand build and fire the clay sculpture. It's unglazed, so the clay can kind of breathe with the different temperature.
It certainly can is a disguise for a birch tree. It looks so real, you know.
So when I rebuilt the trunk of the Birch Woman, I have another project going that I do with children, students, community. It's called the Friendship Tree Sculpture Project, and I had made friendship trees with different words of peace. So I decided to do this for the Birch Woman. So inscribed amongst the birch markings are words of peace.
Words of peace, yes. We'll take another look at that, but tell us about these stumps here, the remains of the tree.
Well, this is funny. When Joe cut down the tree, he calls me up. He goes, "It's your initials, PG."
Pam Golden.
So he saw it, not me. So it's kind of funny.
Yeah, that's good. Well, we'll have another look at the Birch Woman and the peaceful words inside or outside that people don't really notice unless they stand and look.
So there's I'm sure there's more languages that could be added on, but there's also a few other words in there that in English.
Mirembe.
Mirembe is I have a friend from Uganda, and that means peace. In Luganda is the language. And this is a Native American language, and Pache I think is Italian, and Fred is peace in Danish. So
Is that right? Okay.
Yes.
Song, love.
Nigerian and Shalom and Hebrew and Salam,
Let's
Islam.
have another look at her smile. Well, I can tell you were very inspired.
I'm thrilled to have the work here. I've been coming to Weehawken for about 20 years.
Yes.
It's a wonderful, special place, and it's very nice to have my work installed permanently here. And whenever I'm here, people let me know how much they enjoy seeing
Yes,
the
they
Birch women
do.
every year.
As
So
one of
that's
those-
very satisfying. The life of an artist is pretty solitary,
Yes.
particularly a sculptor. So the idea of creating a sculpture for a site-specific space
Yes.
makes me
Well,
very happy.
I'm going to add to the Karen myself and appreciate the opportunity to hear you tell about your work.
I'm so happy to,
Appreciate it.
and thank you for this opportunity,
You're
Miriam.
welcome.